Welcome everybody to the second episode of the Decomposition Pattern podcast, where we break down the hottest takes in tech and programming into their fundamental components. We separate signal from noise, tackle complex topics with clarity, and rebuild our understanding from the ground up. I'm José, and today we're going to talk about the importance of documentation. This topic was triggered by my own experience in software development and my frustrations about the current landscape of technical documentation. So I want to take a little time to talk with you about 3 points that I think are required to improve the general landscape on software documentation. The first thing I'd like to talk about to you is for you who is doing software without doing documentation to understand why it's so important to have it. Obviously, I'm overreacting here, right, for the sake of drama, but I want you also to be empowered with some arguments to advocate internally to developing documentation, if that's the thing that's preventing you from creating documentation. If you're just not developing good documentation because you're lazy, then that's on you and you should change. But if the problem is more bureaucratic, then I want to give you a few arguments of why documentation is important, why it makes a big difference, and how that doing documentation can compound over time. So, have you ever been frustrated about lack documentation on some software, or having bad documentation that only gives you more questions and doubts and just worse, makes you have a bad day by not knowing how to do things? I know I've been in that place. And that's one of the main reasons I think having proper documentation is important, so we don't create and end that cycle of violence that is not having good documentation that people can actually use. Having just for the sake of having it, that auto-generated documentation sometimes, or most of the times, I think it's subpar, it's not relevant, and it's missing the point. So how to make it in a different way? So good documentation, what is a good documentation in my perspective? A good documentation should explain the problem that the software resolves, what is the implemented solution in product terms, so any stakeholder can look into that and say, yeah, this looks like something we want to use. And then should have a technical part that says, if that's the point, obviously, but have a technical part that says, how can we integrate it, or how can we use it in our own projects? These 3 small pieces of information are missing on a lot of documentations I've experienced, or at least the ones that I can classify as really bad or lacking documentation. I look into it and I just see a list of endpoints or methods or functions that I can use, but I don't see why I would use them. I don't see exactly what they're for. I'm gonna try an error, or sometimes they have the very weird naming that I can't really understand. So all of that just adds up to a bad documentation consumption experience. And I kind of understand why things are the way they are. I have seen a lot of difficulties for software engineers primarily to advocate for the development of good documentation. Be it that they might think they don't have a voice or they don't have a say on things, and think they might need to ask for permission to develop documentation, which should not be the case, right? I don't see any surgeons like ask for permissions once you already gave your consent to be opened, to how to go about it and like do the thing it needs to be done. It's not like, hey, I think that I don't know doing this fix in your organs should be secondary, or like vacuum the bleeding is secondary, is not important, right? Like there's some things that we can't imagine them saying. This is a very stupid analogy, I can admit to that, but it's just to pass on a point that us as the surgeons in software engineering, right, we don't need to say every nitty gritty detail of how we're going to do and execute a solution, right? We should just assume and implicitly include that. Okay, that this actually hooks into the second point I want to talk about, which is we need to implicitly include documentation into our software development process. We cannot do it. We shouldn't, and we can't. I need to be very extreme here. We can't do it other way around. If you're with me and think that the software documentation landscape needs to be improved, we need to do it this way. We need to make it implicit in our software development cycles. We don't, because when we treat it as a secondary thing, then we will always have problems finding the time and the resources necessary to do it. But if we include it in the core part of our work, developing software, then there's no fighting to be done. It is what it is, and we have time. We get the time and the resource necessary to develop the project and the software, and that includes developing the documentation. So stop looking into it as a secondary thing. Don't say we're going to do the project and then do the documentation. Just say we're going to do the project, we're going to execute the project, this is what we need to do. And you don't need to reference documentation. Documentation is implicit in that, and then you add it to your software development lifecycle. There's also this continuously doubt of, okay, so how do I start doing documentation? Maybe you're somebody that has no experience in documentation development and you don't know how to start, and you want, or you already did some documentation but you want to know how to make it better. So I will now go into my third point, which is sharing my own approach to documentation. I go from first principles. I try to develop documentation from the higher level to somewhat technical level. By higher level, I mean from the product perspective. That just brings me to a level where I can talk with all stakeholders, so I can show why and document why the project exists, what is the problems it solves, right? And then I can go into a little bit more technical details and say how it solves it and how can we integrate with it. This is like the 4 parts that I assume it should be in a documentation document. And actually, to create the documentation, it also forces me to think about the problems, right? So for us to have to detect the problem, we need to think about it, and to come up with a solution, we need to think about that too. So there's also this very interesting positive consequence of developing documentation, which is we need to think about the problem or the thing that we're going to document. And by thinking about it, we're also investing almost implicitly again. You're investing into seeing all the right hooks that would come your way if you just went into full execution mode. So it has an impact in the quality of your software development, because we're already seeing the tight turns and the possible problems that you would be facing in the middle of the development. So you might raise questions early. You might go and know that you need to talk with this other colleague to download some tribal knowledge, something like that. But the thing is, after think about the problem, we start to document what we're going to do. That's what I usually do. So I think about the problem and I document the solution for that problem in the product terms. and then I go into a more technical detail and describe the architecture that I want to apply to support that product solution for that problem, right? So all of that then gets compiled and available in the project details. And then everybody that needs to work on that project, or the 6 months from now, if they want to consult what was done on that project and want to understand what happens, you just need to go and check those documents. And the thing is that doing this kind of work, and I'm talking about the project just to be a little bit more macro in the topic, but you can apply the same strategy even for a bug report. So you get a bug report, you think about the problem that the bug report states there is, you document how you're going to fix it, and then you add it to the dossier as a change in behavior of the current software that you intervened, right? So we can apply this into all layers and to all types of situations. But the thing is, if we're doing this consistently, we're also making sure that the documentation is continuously up to date with the current software behavior, right? Which is also one of the other problems that many people that start doing documentation face, which is how to keep the documentation updated without with low effort. The low effort is just making no effort at all. If we always thinking about the problem first, you're already making an effort to update the documentation. You just need to download your thoughts into a piece of paper or into a digital document and edit whatever is already there. And then you implement the thing, and then you archive and join and merge that new documentation into whatever documentation there is. You want more concrete things? Just, I don't know, if you use Notions or Apple Notes or just pen and paper or whatever, it does not care, but open a new document, do exactly what I said before. Describe the problem, come up with a product solution for the problem, and describe the architecture you're going to implement. Okay, and describe the architecture not on the nitty-gritty details like line by line what you're going to do, but in a more broader sense, like I need a new database system, so I'm going to describe exactly that. We need a database system of a relational type or a no relational type, whatever. Right? Or we need a new HTTP service or whatever, and describe the behavior and why it exists. Don't say just exactly how you implement it. Just say what you need to implement. Just think about the future. That will help you keep a very good and interesting decouple from the concrete implementation, which then will allow you to go and change some things in the implementation and not need to continuously update the documentation, because it's still relevant and still up to date, and it gives enough information to understand how things work. And then people can just go and look into the code if that's relevant, or look into the service, whatever, right? And that's how I do things. And I've been doing it for a lot of time now. I think I'm reaching the 5 or 6 years I'm using this personal framework and approach to documentation, and I consistently see positive things, like a very clear understand of the domain and the problem, a very close and accurate development time estimates. So all of that compounds into good execution, because I think about the problem, so now I know how to circumnavigate it and drive the project until the finish line. So that's it. That this has not much more science to it. You just need to be very persistent and continuously apply, and understand and trust the process that good documentation will ease your life, and it's a really solid investment over time. Okay? And if we all do this effort, I'm very sure we can change the current landscape in the majority of projects that don't have like technical writers and all of those specific roles just to come up with documentation, right? You can implicitly include that in our software development, and we help ourselves and our team and the company to thrive and to have this very nice documentation where we can show to people we're proud of it, and it helps us understand, and we can always reference it because it's always up to date and it's always relevant, and it makes our life easy. That's all for this episode. Please come join us in our Discord server. The invitation link is on the podcast description. Feel free to join, come hang out, come just give me your feedback on the episode. I have been having some feedback on the other episodes, and already helped me try to improve this. Also, if you don't want to join Discord, just leave a comment and just tell me what's your experience with documentation, what's preventing you from having a better documentation, or let me know if my perspective actually makes sense or not. We're here to learn with each other, but until then, have a nice day.